Well, good morning, everybody. It's 10 a.m. Welcome to our session today, the next in our 2025 Masterclass series, and it's entitled Inside the Mysterious World of Premium Wine. Before we get down to business, a couple of the reminders on housekeeping. Please make sure that you are muted, both with your audio and video. The only two people we want to see on the screen today are our presenter, our expert, and me. We have a chat button down the bottom. If you've got a question, pop it in there. I keep my eye on it as we're talking, and I'm happy to introduce that or answer that, get Tim or address the questions that you put into that chat button area. And again, the inevitable question we get, are we recording today's program? Yes, we are. Later on this afternoon, you will receive a live stream announcement from us with a recording link to the LuxeSF YouTube channel. So if you are pulled away from the broadcast today and want to go back and look at it again, you'll be able to find it on the YouTube channel. And again, you'll get that link this afternoon. So why today's program? Premium wines represent a secret society whose rituals remain off limits to the uninitiated. I've been dabbling in wine for 25 years now, and I still feel pressured and intimidated by my exposure to the world of premium wines on occasions. We're determined to shine light on this cloistered universe where exclusivity, language, and ceremony act as barriers to a pleasure that should be enjoyed by all without the mustiness and formality that permeates much of that world. Today, we'll delve into the characteristics, marketing, and practices of this rarefied world in order to better understand and appreciate the true value and glory of premium wines and why they should command our appreciation and our pocketbook. Our expert guide, or our Sherpa guide for today's discussion, is Tim Irwin, the General Manager of Penfolds in the Americas. Tim is an experienced, dynamic wine specialist who began his career in Australia over 20 years ago. He's a fellow Aussie. Having worked at multiple luxury wineries in the past, his most notable time was spent launching the most expensive wine in the world, the Penfolds limited edition Ampule, that retailed for $168,000. We'll inquire more about that from Tim. There were actually people who bought these. And most recently, Tim was responsible for the launch of the Penfolds California collection, a journey that was 20 years in the making. He holds a Bachelor of Viticulture and Winemaking degree, as well as formal credentials from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, WSET of London. Tim, welcome. It's great to have you with us today.
Pleasure to be here, Alf.
And Tim talks like a real Australian, not like me. I've had my accent polluted after 50 years in this country. Tim, before we get into the questions, just give me a sort of a minute or 2 minutes on Penfolds. Just bring us up to date on Penfolds, if you would.
Yeah, for sure. So Penfolds are 181 years old this year, so kind of rich history. Founded when the colony of South Australia was started with Dr. Penfold. So GP, making tawnies, fortified for medicinal purposes. What really kind of put us on the map in table wine in Australia was the creation of Penfolds Grange, which is arguably the icon of Australia, highly sought after now, a bit of a defiant story, Alf, for a later date. But, one of those kind of collectibles modeled off Bordeaux. And, as we look not just for the past 181 years, we're looking to the future. So we're now producing wines all around the world. We're making wines, as you mentioned, in California. We're making wines in China, in France. And that's the evolution of where we see Penfolds, as long as it's got that house style moving forward. So we're in a lot of markets around the world. We have teams based everywhere. Our wines, you mentioned the Ampule, but they kind of, start at $20 and we go all the way up. So we see kind of a wide gamut of price points and consumers at that as well. So it's an interesting time in the wine market, and I can't wait to delve into it.
Just out of vicarious pleasure or interest, the Ampule, how many of those did you sell?
Yeah, so we produced 12 of them. So I encourage people to Google Penfolds Ampule. It's something special, right? So we have the world's oldest continuous producing Cabernet vines. They date back to the 1880s. No phylloxera, a disease that you have to rip out your vines. So we have special bins that we call them. And this was the 2004 vintage single vineyard. So in there, there's kind of only one bottle, but you have to break the glass in order to open it. So a winemaker will fly anywhere in the world to open it. So we made 12 of them. One's in our museum and 11 sold all around the world. 3 here in the US, China, Europe, across the board. So pretty special, never to be done again. But for us at Penfolds, we're always about innovation and creating something new. And, that's the spirit of who we are.
What's the personality of somebody who spends $168,000 on an ampule?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the ultra high net worth collectors, and I think it's also an investment for a lot of people as well. None of the ampules have been open yet, but as soon as one opens, there's only 10 left, for example. So, the character of the person, they can be wine collectors, they can just be investors. We see that a lot in wine. Sometimes it performs better than the S&P 500. So it really varies, and that secondary market's just as important for us at Penfolds in terms of maintaining that kind of aspiration for the brand as well. So, mixed bag of people. I wouldn't say they're all wine collectors, but, collectors of in some capacity.
I want to zero into the basics of premium wines. And before I do that, one more question on Penfolds. The tariffs that have been instituted, given that Penfolds has a high degree of penetration in China, particularly, how will the tariffs affect Penfolds, given that you're an Australian producer, you're also a Napa producer, you're shipping all over the world? What's going to be the headline out of this for Penfolds?
Yeah, I think everyone's affected by tariffs in some capacity. I think we're seeing it before. We've been through this before. We were locked out of China for 3 years post-COVID. We've just been let back in last April with the high, obviously, taxes put on there. So we're not foreign to it. It will impact it. I think it's going to impact people across the board, including Penfolds, in terms of cost of goods. When you think glass and all those components that we bring in, we're making US wines just like some of our colleagues here in the US. And then obviously, as we go through the line, there's kind of, pressures across the board. So we'll see that. We've kind of navigated before, and it's about how we navigate that is kind of is critical. So I don't think anyone's immune, Alf, but again, we've been through it before, so we've at least got a little bit of experience there.
Ultimately, Tim, what do you think? What percentage increase do you think a domestic consumer, such as me, will experience as a result of the tariffs on the wines that you're producing, given that you do have those increases in glass, etc.?
Yeah, I think it will come down to where the wine is made first and foremost. So, depending on the tariff, Europe's got a certain amount. Australia, we've seen 10%. So it'll come down to the region and ultimately how much along the supply chain people are willing to take. So you could see a few dollars, maybe a little bit higher, depending on the impact across the board. So I think we'll see that not just on wine, we'll see it on other goods, no doubt. And we know the economic pressures out there. We know there's inflation. So we're in a bit of a perfect storm at the moment, Alf. But just remember, wine is a social lubricant. We do like to relax a little, so don't forget that.
Tim, let's zero down to the basics of just the premium wine category. I want to get some definition on that. Give me some feel, price point, appellation, varietal, red versus white. I always sort of view premium wines as red. I don't know why that is, but it is. It's that Cabernet thing. Regions, price range. Can you put some meat around those bones?
Yeah, I think when you think premium, there's obviously what's in the bottle, right? Which you've probably alluded to the most there, Alf. So you've got, areas that are highly aspirational. You've got varietals like Cabernet that you mentioned that are, the most consumed product. It tends to skew red, no doubt, across the board. But when it comes to premium, I don't think it's just what's in the bottle. It's probably the most important thing, because if you want someone to come back and buy a second bottle, that's obviously critical. But for me, if you're premium, you're doing every little touch point. Luxury as the word that we throw out there, that is experience. That is, how does it show up? That is, what does my brand look like on social media? So it's about everything that you do. There's third-party endorsement, no doubt, which obviously provides a bit of a guide for consumers. So in the bottle is critical. Price obviously plays a factor just in terms of perception, but then it's also around how you show up as a brand across every touch point. I think that's what really defines a premium wine. If we were to go to kind of data, if you will, Circana, which is one of the data insights scan data that we see, it's about a third of the total business in the US market. they define it as $20 and above, right? I think a lot of people, depending on what you're producing, may go higher than that. It might be $50 and above. So they kind of vary. I think the key thing to consider, and especially as we have the chat today, is where consumers are going and which price point they're entering as well. So, you know, it's a key guide to the future of wine in terms of the future.
Jim, put Penfolds aside, take that hat off. Pick a premium wine that you admire
Yep.
because they are a premium wine and how they got to be a premium wine. What would that label be?
Oh, look, I think there's different price points, right? And if you probably most people here domestically in the US, you see certain brands like the higher end, the Harlans of the world, if you will. They obviously have a great, they've done a wonderful job in terms of building scarcity and image. That's probably at the top end of the tree, right? Amazing kind of producer and family that's been, you know, generational as well. If you look at kind of the core brands, you know, I'm just thinking Napa Valley. I'm here in Napa Valley at the moment. You've got brands like, you know, Silver Oak, Camus, brands that have been around for a long kind of periods of time, that have built that equity in terms of, you know, desire amongst consumers.
And what's been the common element that's made them be successful as premium brands?
Yeah, I think consistency is key across the board. That's obviously what's in the bottle, and then, you know, how they market themselves as well to consumers and how they show up. You know, once you get that advocacy for a brand, and I think a lot of these brands have that and that desirability, you've done a great job. But at the same time, can't get complacent with that, right? And I think we're at that point in time where that evolution is occurring and attracting that next generation of wine consumers. So how they evolve and continue to evolve to appeal to that next generation of consumers will be absolutely critical to their success as well.
And we'll come back and talk about that. Um, the last 10 years, where are we? 25. So go back 10 years. Let's trace what's happened to premium wines in that 10-year period. And let's stay inside the US for now. Well, you can stay wherever you want to, but certainly the last decade. What's happened to premium wines? What's been their progression or regression in that period of time?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back 10 years, you'd probably say, you know, the category was, you know, seeing single digit growth to being flat across the board. So not huge growth. I think, you know, the last 20 years, we've probably seen a lot of growth driven by boomers in particular in terms of consumers. As we kind of step forward through the decade, we've had things like COVID. There's obviously been outputs of COVID that have had a huge impact, particularly the last few years. You know, consumption initially went up, kind of, you know, died off. You saw certain channels, e-com pick up. Everyone's at home. You've also seen places like restaurants and hospitality take a bit of a hit there as well in terms of staffing and people getting into the industry. So that's obviously had an impact in terms of like how people are, how much inventory they're taking in, how much they're stocking. And then probably of late, we're in this generational shift. That's probably one of the biggest components. We've got inflation, tariffs, all the things we've kind of just briefly touched on that are having a huge component in terms of like what the future looks like as well. So, you know, around the world, they're saying wine is down 3.3% globally. And I think where you're seeing the trends change is kind of value wines or inexpensive wines are tending to see a dip, whereas kind of premium wines, whilst they're not completely back where they are, that is where they're saying the future is. So the IWSR data is saying, you know, the future is kind of premiumization. So whilst at the moment there's a lot of noise, there's also a bit of optimism in terms of where the category is going. And I think a lot of suppliers are doing that.
And why do you think that premiumization is taking place?
I think consumer behaviors are one, right? So I think we're seeing people necessarily drinking less, but they're drinking more premium, right? And I think as you break up the demographics, you've got boomers, obviously, kind of maybe drinking less as they age. You've got millennials that are coming into the category. And there's been some interesting shifts in terms of that next generation. You know, Rabobank just came out with a report around alcohol consumption. And it's quite fascinating, Alf, because what the big shift in the change is kind of digital and phones, right? So if you remember when you and I were younger in Australia, we probably got into alcohol a little bit younger. They're even saying people underage where you try it. The shift now is because of the digital age and the phone, you know, your parents may track you on your phone, right? So the threat of someone taking a photo or whatnot is actually shying people away from trying alcohol younger. They obviously have less disposable income, which is a big component of that. as they go through. And even with college, they're actually starting their alcohol journey later, is what they're saying. The other impact of that is there's more diversity with this younger generation, which is critical. So if you looked at consumption kind of years ago, the white male consumer was taking a big kind of heavier consumption, whereas now we're seeing more diversity. We're seeing females drinking more. We're seeing, Hispanics, Latinos. We're seeing people of color, Black people across the board. So what that's actually done is it's kind of flattened out a little bit in terms of overall consumption. But the big challenge for wineries in the future is how they market to that next generation and make sure that they're recruiting them into the category. So it's an interesting time, but there's a little bit more behind the details, if you will.
Yeah, and I want to drill into the demographics in a moment, but again, has the premium category exploited its potential in the last 5 to 10 years, or has it left money on the table?
I think there's a bit of negativity out there, but I think the opportunity, if you will, is about getting that next generation, right? And that's where the money and the opportunity is, and how brands and wineries shift their strategies around attracting this next generation of wine consumers, right? We knew it was coming, right? That's undeniable.
And again, the move then to the appreciation of of a premium wine is why people just want better.
Yeah, I think people appreciate higher end wines. I think if you think about the digital age, right? I just was talking to a colleague the other day. Some of the people, when you think about wine and who's actually buying that wine, right? Educated, tends to be generational. They may not be socializing as much, but when they're spending money on alcohol, they may not be that they're going to spend something a little bit more, right? I think that's part of the socialization. So that's probably where you're seeing the jump in terms of price point and the ability to spend more. So when you do, you've got money to do it, but you may not be doing it as frequently. I think that's where you're seeing the jump in terms of that price point into the premium category.
The primary purchasers of premium wines, let's say now, are certainly boomers, right? People like me. But the trouble is, every time the hearse goes by to the cemetery, that population decreases. But who's been buying premium wines to date? It's us, and who else?
Yeah, I think boomers are there, right? I think think about life stages as well, Alf. We kind of touched on it before. You've got people in college. You go off, you get kind of a paying job, you've more disposable income. You may get married, you may not. So that's kind of obviously you're in a life cycle, right? We're seeing millennials there. We see them very open to purchasing. I think it's 65% of them are willing to spend $20 or more on a bottle. So we are seeing that lifestyle shift in terms of like when they're purchasing. We're also seeing things like household income have an effect, right? I think it's two people, like households are shrinking in terms of how many people are there. So two people in terms of incomes, that used to be around 13%. It's about 25%. We've seen single household numbers go from 13 up to 29%. Right. So there's shifts in terms of like demographics in general, which are also pushing kind of how much people are consuming as well. So if I live by myself, I'm not necessarily going to have a 750 ml bottle. So maybe that's a 375. So there's evolutions. There's not one kind of, this is it. It's a combination of certain things that are having a huge effect.
The person who buys premium wine, what percent consume within a reasonable period of time versus the percent that lays it down as a collectible or something to pass on to the kids or something that I'll drink down the road? Yeah. I've always been fascinated by that.
So most purchases of wine will happen, I think, off the top of my head, it's over 90% within that week, right? So most purchases will be instantly consumed. Collecting wine may not be as common as it was in the past, right? So we know that when people are buying, most of them are consumed instantly, right? So that's a good sign. And I think that's where you really see your higher end, top of the tree type stuff that may be put down for a few years. But I think that's more highly involved consumers into wine. And I think it's kind of where are people on that journey in terms of education, which is absolutely critical.
Given the economic turmoil with tariffs, inflation, we can go on and on. Is there a risk that premiums will price themselves out of the marketplace?
I wouldn't say necessarily price themselves out. I think it's something
hurt themselves. Is what I meant.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors there, right, Alf, in terms of where they are. There's certain regions I'd say are starting to inflate and that get up there. I think part of what we're seeing, I'll probably take a step back there, is consumers, I think it's 45% of the younger generation want experience, right? So if you look at that and where they're experiencing the wines, tourism is a huge component of that, right? You take Napa Valley where we are now, we know that prices have gone up. It's an expensive trip to come to Napa, right? So how are you appealing to that generation? And then wines are obviously inflating with everything else. So you've got to be super wary of it and work out where that pricing will play a role. You know, is it reducing your experience costs, but then holding price on the other end so you don't lose equity in your brand? So I think there's definitely a danger. I think as we go into kind of this moment in time, and you know, some of these things are cyclical, right? We know that. I think there's just more noise out there than we've probably seen for a while. Brands have to be very wary and make sure that they're cognizant of the moment and how that may have an impact in the future. So it's definitely one to watch.
Within the premium segment, let's stay there. Within that segment, is there too much competition now that a brand like Penfolds has to face? I'm thinking about, you know, too many grapes, price pressures, distribution challenges, etc. How tough is the competition now?
I think you nailed it at the start, Alf. It's a pretty intimidating category to walk into, right? You go down the aisle at the grocery store. It's a bit different to buying a toothbrush, right? You've got a lot more choice. I think you know, retailers are looking at shelf space, so there's naturally a bit of a squeeze going on, no doubt. You mentioned distributors. There's consolidation going on there, where we've seen bigger distributors merge with other ones. So kind of your route to market is a little bit more challenged, particularly depending on, you know, whether you're smaller or larger. So there's a bit of a squeeze, I'd say, going on. We are an agricultural product, and we do see what we call the 7-year cycle, where for whatever reason, you know, you might see a bump in wine out there, and there is definitely a little bit more wine available for people. So we're definitely in that moment around it. I think naturally during these times, you do see some attrition, right? You see some brands that will fall out. I think it's the brands that are cognizant of that and willing to adapt, innovate, maybe take a little bit of risk. We'll see the other side and probably come out stronger, right? Statistically, if you invest at these times, you come out stronger. So it's no doubt going to be a difficult time. You know, the BMO Bank I just read this morning has come out with last quarter's numbers. There's a bit of, you know, probably negativity. They thought about 9% down, ended up coming out about 4% down. And of this survey of 100 CEOs that they put out there, a lot of them saw optimism in the market around, you know, single-digit growth. So there's still opportunities out there. Where they saw growth was direct sales, you know, membership, wine clubs, and points of distribution that will get them through. So whilst it's a bit bleak, it's not all negative out there. So there is some optimism.
Come back to Penfolds for a moment, and I'm not asking you to reveal corporate strategy or anything like that. The buck stops with you in terms of Penfolds in the Americas. You've got all of these competitive premium brands. There are a zillion of them just in California alone. Will you have a quiet conversation with yourself about how you get Penfolds to rise above the pack? What do you say to yourself?
Good question. You don't want to be in that conversation, Alf. No, I'm just kidding. I guess we've got a pioneering spirit at Penfolds. There's no doubt, right? And innovation and the way we think about it, the way we leverage insights to look at consumers and where they're going. You know, we definitely are targeted. You know, we did a collaboration with Nigo. So he's worked for LVMH. He's a, you know, musician. He's got a big network. We did some creative work with him, and that was very intentional, right? That is intentional to attract the next generation. And we're looking at the cues of what that next generation aspire to be and trying to listen to what they want. And I think this is important for all brands around understanding and making sure that the consumers feel included. So as I'm having a quiet word to myself, it's like, how do we make sure that we're relevant? How are we evolving? And I think that I mentioned before, we talked about the last 181 years. We talk about the next 181 years and beyond, right? There's that custodianship to the brand. So whether you're Penfolds or you're another brand, you've got to make sure you take a look at yourself and look at, where am I today and where do I really want to go? And I think this is a really important crossroad for brands to consider that and make sure they're relevant to that consumer.
Tim, let's get into that new consumer, that sort of anybody who's not a boomer, if you will. let me give you the negatives as seen through my jaundiced eyes. They're not gravitating to wine, let alone premium wines with the price points. I would submit wine's lost its appeal with these emerging cohorts, and the actual volume numbers are down. Right, the premium pricing is keeping the category up. I believe there are notions of it being too expensive. More competitive choice is probably the number one reason with cocktails and beers and artisanal, you name it. Um, Excellent wines are now available at cheaper prices. Um, and the premium wine category, by and large, underperforms in terms of creative marketing.
Yep.
So let's put that as the sort of the background Greek chorus. Um, what's happening to the younger cohorts? Why aren't they coming on board, or where are we failing them in terms of bringing them on board?
Yeah, I think one of the key insights we've taken away, particularly around the next generation, is that level of inclusion, right? And I think they're finding, to some degree, are we appealing to them? Like you mentioned a few things before around intimidation, right? Each consumer's at their own point in the journey of wine, right? You don't want to talk down on them. You don't want to make them, it is intimidating, right? So what are the platforms that we're giving them that they feel included and can come into the brand? We know from the studies, they find it romantic, they find it social. There's a lot, quality. There's a lot of cues there that we can lean into in terms of consumption. And so when you think about alcohol in general, like the Surgeon General's come out and said, "Oh, alcohol is bad for you." There's probably been a spike in the younger generation. I think it's 64% said, moderate consumption is not great for you. There's narratives that we can actually switch there, right? Like there is health components as an industry for wine that this should be your beverage of choice. So I think there's a number of factors there probably leaning into why the next generation hasn't necessarily caught onto it. So if I'm looking at that and going, well, there's more diversity in terms of the next generation of consumers, they don't feel included. So how am I adapting that platform? And I think you nailed it on the head, Alf. Wine is a very traditional category. There's no doubt about it. Slower to evolve, all of those things. There's probably two examples, and this is just my experience with people. There was one where I was in Napa. There was a board member of a winery here who said, don't people just pitch up and get 6 cases in the car? And I was like, you've been living under a rock. Nobody's doing that these days, especially with the price points. I've had a friend from LA who's, got disposable income, and his wine's boring. This is what consumers in the sentiment are. It's not
Boring, boring.
boring.
Why?
The
Boring.
experience is
Why?
boring. The experience is boring, right? So, most wine tastings, if you go to a winery, are quite similar, right? So I think these are opportunities for the industry to change the narrative and appeal to the next generation, right? There's certain things we're always going to do because that's who we are, but how are we evolving that experience, whether that's at a winery, whether that's at a restaurant, whether that's where have you, to put that glass of wine in people's hands? I think that's the opportunity that can help shift the future.
All right. So going forward, give me 3 innovative strategies to appeal to that younger demographic that you would implement tomorrow.
Yeah. So we're all connected, right? Digital. If you're not on digital, you've been, I don't know where you've been, right? So I think digital, being present, showing up where they're showing, it doesn't mean you have to show up on every social platform and everywhere. That is a huge opportunity for you to connect with the next generation, right? So
Give me an
digital,
example. Give me an example in your mind as to effective digital.
yeah, pioneering spirits. Like we've got AI coming in, Alf. That is a huge opportunity for the industry. Particularly here in Napa, we've got Silicon Valley down the road. How are we leveraging AI to educate? Maybe tools that can bring down costs and give people a comfortable way to interact and learn about wine. Huge opportunity, right? There's one just off the bat.
All right. So digital is one. Give me 2 more strategies.
Experience, critical, right? The stats show it. I said it before. 45% of the next generation looking for experience over actual physical product, right? Evolve the experience around how we put wine in their hand at certain occasions. I think that's going to be a leap into how people into their wine journey. And the third one's education.
Well, whoa, 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 whoa. Stay with 2. That's
Yep.
great in theory. Be specific. How does that experience alter?
So I think look at what people are doing, right? Where are they showing up? How are they showing up, right? Experience can be digital. I mentioned digital before, but experience can be digital online. It can be physical. How are we making sure that those social settings where people are coming to are really immersed in wine and educational and fun? We need to break down the stereotypical, kind of intimidation factor. That can be, you know, music, evolution, leveraging that whole kind of immersive space into how you're creating that. Customization's key, Alf. You know, we're seeing people wanting more customization in what they do. Personalize it, particularly on the higher end of luxury. You know what I mean? How are we making sure that we're showing up in the lifestyle that they live, right? That could be music, fashion, the list goes on, sport, entertainment, right? We need to make sure that wine has a presence there that is part of that everyday lifestyle. And then probably the third one, as I said, is education, right? Education is key to making sure that, you know, you mentioned it earlier, it's such an intimidating factor, right? How do we make sure that we're talking to people on the level that they want to be spoken to, right? Whether you're new to wine, whether you're at a higher end, that piece is a huge opportunity for us to grow. And I think that's probably where we've seen, like you take the hospitality industry, Alf. We know a lot of people, you know, industries are looking at ways of cutting costs. You know, I love to go to a restaurant and be referred a wine. A lot of those restaurants don't have that capability, so they might be referring something else. How do we make sure that we're looking at kind of who's referring the wine, bringing them on the journey across the board? And that's every touch point, right? There's so many opportunities with digital around education, as I mentioned. So there's probably just three ideas that come to my head right now.
Education for the consumer or education for he or she who delivers the wine?
Both. They're both
Both.
critical, right? The referral from someone at a restaurant is absolutely critical, even if it's a few points of information. The consumer, right? We've got to keep educating the consumer in terms of what it is, why it is, you know what I mean, and bring them on that journey in a compelling way. You know, if you look at other alcohol, spirits, or whatnot, a little bit simpler. So how do we make sure that people come along on the journey?
I once made the comment in front of some wine people that I'd love to see how Disney or Richard Branson would perform if they own a winery and were marketing wine. I had to go wash my mouth out with soap. Otherwise, I was going to be stoned by the meeting. But to that point, why are we not doing that right now? Why not digital experience education? What's holding us back from doing that?
I think it's a point in time where we need to evolve, right? I think the thinking has been so traditional. And I'm not saying everyone, right? There's brands that are easily kind of separating themselves because they're doing this, right? I think this generational shift will help that. And if I'm a winery, I'm looking at who I'm trying to appeal to. Like I'm not the younger generation, unfortunately, Alf, anymore. I want to get people. If I'm going after you know, Hispanics or Latinos, I want someone who knows and lives and breathes that, right? I want, you know, we want diversity within the industry, and diversity will bring opportunity for brands, right? So put people in positions where they can affect your brand and build on your strategy. And I think that's that moment in time where, you know, next generations for wineries need to exist as well, and diversity within it. So the reason we haven't done it is probably we've been in a bit of a luxury, I would say, with boomers leading the charge, but now's the time to make the shift, and I think we'll come out on the other side a lot better for it.
Tim, there's stay with the real premium wine sector and the higher end for that matter. There's that ritual around the consumption process. There's the correct stem. There's opening and cork and check the cork and letting the oxygen get in and the swirl and the appropriate language. And I can pick up a touch of English leather mixed with some Loganberry. That's intimidating. How do we change that? If you were to change the ritual without damaging it, what would you do to the process or to the protocol?
Yeah, I think occasion's key, right, Alf? So before, like, because I think there's always going to be a consumer that's highly involved, wants to know those nuances, right? I think if you're new to the category, like you said, it's intimidating. What are they kind of talking about? If I personally put myself in my wine journey, Alf, as an example, I remember trying an Italian wine for the first time and thought, geez, this tastes like dirt. You know what I mean? How do people drink this? You know what I mean? It wasn't until I educated and whatnot and kind of took that journey that I understood and appreciate and love it now, right? So as you come into the journey, the first thing you need to do is put wine in the occasion before we're talking about that. You know, when was the last time you went to a kind of an establishment that was, you know, higher energy and had a glass of wine? Like, there's opportunities we need to be unlocking in terms of location and consumption that will help bring people in. So, you know, people drink out of stems and they're educated on it at restaurants and things like that. That's kind of a custom, but I think it's not necessarily, it's the way we talk to people and the way we kind of get on their level is probably the most important thing, right? And that's going to break down the intimidation factor more than
But you
anything.
can't do that with a 750. It's too much. I mean, you guys don't do anything with packaging. I very rarely see 375s or the half bottles around there, which would make more sense. Particularly as you've got single people, you've got single households, single person households, and retiree households with just two people who are not going to knock off necessarily a full bottle at one sitting.
Yeah, I mean, innovation in packaging is critical, right? I mentioned it just before, as you referred to, Alf. Like, there's a shift in households, right? So how does the industry adapt around that? Sustainability is a huge component, right? We're agriculturally live in this day in, day out, and there's a bit more of a demand, or there is a demand for consumers to be more sustainable in this space. So it presents opportunities to create new pack formats for people to, I'm only going to have one glass. We'll make sure it's a good one, but I don't have to open the whole bottle. There's, Corvins and things like that probably more highly involved consumers that could be a way around that, so they're not consuming the whole bottle. But this is the opportunity, Alf, around like how do we adapt as an industry and innovate to put ourselves in those occasions.
So I'm an aspiring wine. I hate the term aficionado, but I guess I can't think of another one. But I'm aspiring. I have aspirations to learn, and to know more about better wines. Where do I go?
Yeah, so there's a number of different places, right? I still think wine is subjective, right? You've got your style, Alf, and I've got my style, and that's the first thing to remember, right? So that's one thing that I think people feel forced to, well, I have to like it. Scores and critics are still a source, right? Like I still look at them as a guide. These people have been industry experts for many years, and I think there's still a wonderful kind of light in terms of where you can go. We've all got mobile phones. I don't know anyone who doesn't have a mobile device these days. There's so much information just by a quick Google search. You've got AI now. You get on ChatGPT. You get information there. And I think, again, in public settings, you can feel very intimidated. You don't want to ask the question because I don't want to look a bit silly. You know what I mean? Now that we've got digital at our fingertips, I'm always looking there. The other thing is referral. I love a referral. I love to go and ask someone, what's good? What have you tried lately? If someone's educated, they're more than happy to give you that referral, right? So I think depending on where you are, if you're at home or whatnot, quick Google search, you've got scores that can be kind of third-party endorsement, and then you've got referral. And I think that's the other thing we've noticed is with the next generation is if you give people a few carats of information about the wine, they love to share that as well. So again, there's opportunities in terms of education to kind of break down those stereotypes.
So let's get into some specifics. If you were using the internet to search, where would you go?
Yeah, so wine publications. You've got Wine Spectator, you've got Wine Advocate, you've got James Suckling. There's a number of different kind of leading wine publications that are very focused in terms of the industry. You've got YouTube. There's a number of different kind of YouTubers and bloggers that kind of put out different information and videos and content around what that looks like. Even when you go to a retailer, a lot of retailers have great information around what it is. You go to a wine.com, for example, they've got all the information there. So there's that. And then, there's so many education courses. I mentioned the WSET that I've taken. Wonderful way that you can learn about wine. The first course is not intimidating at all, right? It's basically red, white, what have you, but you can kind of take that journey as well as you learn about it. And there's a number of different kind of ways that you can kind of do courses and things like that. So there's a plethora of resources out there, probably more than there's ever been in the world with the evolution of digital, which makes it fun and exciting.
Social media, where do you like to see Penfolds posted?
Yeah, I think there's you've got your own handles, right? Your own channels. You've got influencers these days that play a bigger role in terms of next generation and recruitment. So
Be specific. Be specific. Where do you want to see Penfolds featured?
There's Instagram. We love to see it there. We're on Facebook. TikTok's still one with legalities. So I think anywhere there's potential consumers and we do it kind of in the Penfolds lens is absolutely critical, right? I think AI plays a role in the future. That's all lot of interest in that. I think it all comes down to the data that's been fed in there, as we know. So that's one to watch. And then I think the thing you're always watching is like that digital evolution, right? Where are people hanging out? That next generation's gaming. They're doing a lot of different things. As long as it's legal, maybe that's where we need to start showing up. So again, we're always looking at different opportunities to show up. We did an NFT a few years ago, Alf, as it kind of came out. Again, unknown territory in terms of where that goes, but if we're not innovating, well, then we're probably falling behind. So as long as we've taken, the right steps to show up in the right places, we'll give it a go.
You mentioned ratings. I've spoken to a lot of certainly winemakers and winery owners who hate the concept of ratings. How important are they really? To the consumer, they're very important, right?
Yeah, I think there's still a relevance, right? If you walk into a store and you see 92 points, you're probably more if it was, a different score, right? So I
I
still
would,
think
yeah.
they play a relevance in the world. I think there's new platforms, there's information that consumers give their ratings on, right? So it really comes down to the individual of like, what do I trust in terms of a source of information? If you're going to a restaurant and it gets 4.5 stars, you're probably going to pay attention to that. Probably similar with wine. So I think as ratings and kind of people's opinions come out, there's different ones, right? And I don't think there's one source of truth, but in terms of wine ratings, I think they're still relevant. There's still a guide to whether you should be trying it or not. And I think that's important. Not everything gets rated though, Alf. You got to remember that too. So it's a little bit of an industry specific piece that we've always kind of had.
But do you talk to your winemaker and say, "Hey, Peter, you need to boost the ratings"?
Well, I don't think it's that easy, Alf, in terms of
You,
boosting
you know what
ratings,
I
right?
mean, though, in essence.
Yeah, I think I'll go back to Penfolds. I think there's certain wineries that may really rely on ratings in order to boost their profile. For us at Penfolds, ratings are important. Again, as a guide, right? So it's not the one or be end all. You know what I mean? So I think ultimately, if we're producing a wine of quality that's in the bottle, hopefully that's reflected in the ratings, right? And I think if we're focused on the quality in the bottle, the
It'll
rest will
happen
hopefully
automatically.
come.
You, Tim Owen, you personally, your two top rating experts that you look at, that you respect.
Yeah, I think like Wine Spectator's probably still the big one around the world for that matter. They're always good. Wine Advocate's probably up there as well. And I think they're probably the big two. You see emergence of James Suckling as well. And
Suckling.
I think James Suckling's doing an amazing job in terms of experiential and bringing new consumers into wine as well. So they're probably the big three at the moment. But I think when you look at kind of ratings across the board, they all have kind of areas that they focus in on. And I think as long as you can respect that and find what you like in terms of critics, that's what people will look for, right? I think there's certain styles that they go after and just finding your own comfort level.
Tim, I want to segue into varietals for just a moment because the area I know very little about. But within the premium sector, which varietals do you think provide a sort of a nice avenue for exploitation? It's real opportunity, if you will, in terms of price, taste, value. They're just not known. The degree of their degree of recognition, and let's go worldwide for that matter. I mean, I get the impression that we know nothing about what comes out of Mendoza, or
Yeah.
even Australia for that matter, or the Marlborough region, or New Zealand. So, talk about varietals. Where is there opportunity there?
Yeah, I think the great thing about wine, whilst it's intimidating, there's so much exploration to be done. And that's why I love this industry, right? I love finding a bottle and going, wow, that's pretty amazing, or a different style. Like that is my DNA to a core. And I'd probably a lot of people have the same kind of play around it. I think Riesling is a varietal is still an opportunity, and it spans from dry to sweet, right? So you can appeal to a
And
lot of
big in
people.
Australia, but not even on the radar here.
Yeah, and that's opportunity, right? German Riesling's lovely, Alsatian, so there's wonderful Riesling around the world, and I think it presents great opportunity. I'm a fan of Semillon, right? There's some esoteric grapes that I kind of go after. Again, pretty similar in the camp of Riesling. And then, there's Grenache and other varietals as well. I'm a bit biased, Alf, but Shiraz from Australia, incredible opportunity and value. So not just in Australia, but around the world, I think there's every major producing wine region has these kind of incredible value wines. And one thing that critics and publications do incredibly well is they'll always produce their top value wines of the year. And you will typically find a lot of these varietals on there. Riesling, I'm sure you'd find on there a lot. You'd find varietals that may not be your mainstream, your Cabernet and Chardonnay. And I think that's a great resource for people to go and get that element of discovery.
So why is it that we've got all these great varietals out there, these opportunistic varietals? Why do we stay with Cab and
I think,
Chardonnay?
well, it's still in demand, right, Alf? I think, restaurants play a critical role in expanding varietals, right? And I think, by the glass, trial, what have you. And that is why the industry people and sommeliers are so important to our business in terms of educating people, right? You might be a bit intimidated to buy it off the shelf. But if I can have a glass, I like that, I'm educated, right? So that's probably a key component of education and exploration, right? And whether you're at a restaurant or whether a wine shop or whether it's online through recommendation, AI, jump on Amazon, will tell you 12 different things. And I think that's the area of opportunity. One thing you hear all the time, Alf, is tell me something, refer something that I like, right? So if I like Cabernet, tell me another varietal I like. There's a simplicity to it, but it's also opportunity, right? And I think that's where you'll see varietals and other regions potentially expand.
Except, Tim, I was in a restaurant the other night. A very cheap Sauvignon Blanc was $15 for this much.
Yep.
The same menu had a cab. The cabs were sort of 20, $25 a glass. That's prohibiting trial and consumption, no?
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is you're also saying the cost to produce those, right? That's just a reality. So, Sauvignon Blanc, you're unlikely to see a lot of oak potentially on that $15, whereas the mechanics to essentially make that glass of Cabernet may be a little bit higher. And I think also regions, your price per frit, all of those come into ultimately the cost of what it is there, right? $25, yes, it's an expensive glass, but I think it's also, typically it can be an indicator of quality too, right? Across the board.
But my point, where I was heading there, was I think the on-premise people are working against you in terms of their pricing policies. They're ripping the consumer off.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
And
tricky
by the way,
one.
they provide no education in the process outside of a written menu, a wine
Yeah,
list.
and I think that's probably back to the output of COVID, where we need to make sure that we're appealing to people who want to get into hospitality and become a sommelier and refer wine. I think that's where we've seen a bit of a shift and more opportunity than anything, right? And I also think, restaurants are under pressure too, right, to produce on their P&L. So, alcohol is a mechanism for them to obviously be profitable and stay sustainable at the end of the day. So, like, again, there's probably mechanics around that of why they're that price. But at the same time, we need to make sure we get that balance that we're bringing people into the category as well.
Map of the world. You're looking at the map of the world. Let's start picking out some regions that we as consumers should at least start thinking about. Certainly Stellenbosch, South Africa, Argentina, Chile. Go through the litany. Go through the list.
Yeah, I mean, Spain, I love Spain. You've got value wines there all the way up to a Vegas, Sicilia, iconic wine around the world. Something diverse. I mentioned Germany before. I think the exploration of wine is a great one, right? You mentioned Stellenbosch, beautiful wines. Don't really see a lot of it here in the US, but I just encourage people to diversify and really take that next plunge into it, right? And I think the great thing is people are receptive to more expensive wines, $20 and over. But if you're in that aisle, ask someone or give it a go, because most of the time, across the board, there's great quality wines coming out of most regions around the world, right? And it's just a matter of finding that and trusting the source. You mentioned Argentina, you've got Chile, you've got so many regions, and that's the fun part about wine. So you've definitely got to dive in head first. Don't forget Australia too. There's some great wines out of there biasly.
What about China? You mentioned earlier on before we got on this call that they're producing better wines now. Is that true?
Yeah, so we produce for Penfolds, we produce a wine called CWT, Chinese wine trial. So it's a first iteration of that. It's Cabernet and Marcelin. Marcelin's a big Bordeaux blended varietal. So the industry's taking leaps and bounds. I think their level of quality has gone way up over time, and that's again kind of within their industry, kind of supporting it as well. So over time, they've gotten leaps and bounds of where they were, and again another area of to explore in due course. So it's been for Penfolds, it's been a great evolution, and excited to be part of it.
So a couple of personal questions before we wrap this up. You've got guests coming in for dinner tonight, right? Just regular friends.
Yep.
And you decide you're going to go to the local wine store and you're going to pick up a couple of bottles of wine. What's your process? And you're
So,
undecided, by the way. You're undecided. You don't have a laundry list.
yep. So it depends on it depends on the friends, I had to say, Alf, of how
You
involved
you
they
you
are,
willing
right?
to you're willing to spend a little bit of money on them.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
okay.
too
They're
much
good
chunk.
friends, really
Yeah.
good friends, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah, they are.
No,
Yeah.
again, the great thing about when I'm hosting dinner is I love to explore with my friends. Right, there's a wonderful wine shop, boutique wine shop up the road here, and I will literally walk in there and say, "Hey, what's something tried? Here's my price point. Here's the varietal, red, white, whatever varietal it is," and they would typically refer something, and so then I can say, "I just picked this up, pretty interesting." Give them a few points, off you go. Right, so that's typically my process in terms of kind of finding and discovering. And I love that element of that socialization with friends about finding it, right? And I think they enjoy it too. That's the great thing about wine, is it is an experience in itself when we're opening bottles. So that's typically it. Sometimes I'm online, Alf. Sometimes I'll just like look at reviews, as I mentioned before. I might buy a few bottles just to try it out. Hey, I just bought this one online, got a good rating. You know what I mean? So depending on the source and when it is, if I've got it here, I've got to go pick something. That's typically my process.
What was the last wine you experimented with?
Oh, that's a good one, Alf. I had a wine it was Italian wine. Never heard of the region. It was referred to me at a restaurant. It was about $100, and it blew my mind. And if I didn't ask the gentleman,
Because
it was just the quality, the style, everything. And I guarantee if he hadn't said, "Hey," because I said to him, I said the same thing. "Hey, can you recommend something?" He goes, "I've just got this in. Try this." And literally was enamored by it. I was with my wife. Fantastic occasion. We loved it. Right. So, and that is literally my DNA, that level of curiosity of what's out there.
Tim, the your own cellar, how big is it?
Not big enough, Alf, I will say.
How many bottles? How deep?
There's a few hundred bottles. I have wines that I'll put away, like kind of for a special occasion that I know will age. And then I have kind of everyday wines that, maybe $30 to $50 that you may pull out on a social occasion. So that's kind of it. My old man's got a cellar in Australia that I tend to stock up and send wines to him. So I don't touch them, and he's pretty disciplined around that. So yeah, I think storing wine, I've got a wine fridge here, is a great way to reward yourself, especially for those wines that will age.
How frequently do you and your family drink wine?
A few times a week, definitely, especially on weekends. So yeah, we enjoy kind of that social aspect of sharing a glass with people. So yeah, no, it's fun.
So I cut you a blank check and say, go out and buy yourself that one bottle of wine or that one case of wine that you always wanted to buy, but something held you back.
Yep.
No restriction, unlimited. What would you buy?
Oh wow.
And it can't be Penfolds.
Yeah, no, I'd probably go to the old world. I'd probably be looking at Bordeaux or Burgundy, and probably one of the iconic producers, right, and a great vintage. So I'm waiting for that check, Alf, and then I'll share a glass with you. How's that sound?
It's in the mail.
Good.
Tim, one other stupid question. The one wine movie that you've always liked.
There's a few out there. Trying more documentaries. I mean, there's the ones that I think people remember, like the Sideways of the world, things like that, that really highlighted the industry. Yeah, that probably comes to mind. I think it was probably more mainstream, so that people still talk about, right? That's a good sign. So
Good,
that's probably
good
the first
pick.
one, maybe.
All right, let's wrap up. Let's come back to business again. I want to stay with it. I want to end on innovation. I mean, you've got the chair. I mean, you're sitting in the chair right now. You have to do something about the Penfolds brand. So, in terms of innovation, if you had unlimited authority, money, resources, etc., what direct innovative tactics or strategies would you implement tomorrow? Thinking about the experience, thinking about packaging, thinking about pricing, thinking about all those issues. What's the low hanging fruit in terms of innovation for premium wine that'll get us over this hump, particularly with the emerging cohorts?
Yeah, I think it's experience, Alf. I think if we get experience right and we get people into the brand, listen to what the consumer's saying, because they're saying experience is just as much as product. That's probably where I'd be investing my time and my money. But again, evolving that experience to be listening to what they say and being inclusive around that, right? An experience could be a pop-up, could be at a restaurant, could be cuisine, the pairings, like listening to what that next generation of consumers is saying and really immersing them in the stories of the brand and why we're Penfolds. And I think that's really kind of the key to bringing in the next consumer, because one, they're tasting it, and two, you're educating them at the same time.
So keeping that experience globe in mind, do you have ideas that you think can be not revolutionary, but certainly innovative in terms of experience that can be applied to your brand?
Yeah, I think leverage digital, right? Digital is such a huge way that we can bring in content. You can bring in artistry. You can bring in other industries and collaborations together. I mean, you look at Adidas and Louis Vuitton, right? Two brands coming together. That was almost shock value, right? But got attention. So if you're bringing in kind of all of those elements, and that's the beauty of experience as a general piece, then you can create something special with a glass of wine at hand, and you're obviously tasting it, which is probably the most important thing.
So, Tim, tell us what we should buy from the Penfolds lineup. What's out there? What's the
Yeah,
deal of the day? What's the deal of the day?
the deal of the day. Well, Penfolds Bin 389, Baby Grange is one of my favourites. Cabernet and Shiraz goes back to 1960. The best thing, Alf, is you can drink it tonight or put it down for 20 years. It has a lot of versatility. So I'll leave you with that one, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. It is the number one purchased wine in many years in Australia and around the world for us, because you can buy it by the case and put it away and drink it over time. So I'll leave you with that.
What's the price point on that?
It's about $70. So
That's good price.
yeah.
Tim, thank you. This has been a great 1 hour. I had more questions, but we always promise to keep it to an hour. So thank you for joining us and opening up and telling us some things we didn't know. It's a confusing category, to say the least. One can never be educated enough about it. And to
No,
everybody else out there, we will again send out a live stream link later on this afternoon. So be on the lookout. Check your spam folders if it doesn't come through. Tim, thank you. And to all of us out there, it's 11 o'clock. We're going to say goodbye. Go drink some wine. Makes Tim happy. Makes us all happy. Ciao.
We miss you.